was working with the Library Foundation, and I asked the gentleman, it's a Saturday morning, you can be anywhere, so why here, why now? He says, well, reading is important. And I said, great, but why are you here? If you can ask somebody 5 whys, sometimes you get down to the bottom of it. I didn't have to ask him 5 whys, but I said, so why? He says, reading is fundamental. And I immediately responded, well, that's an 80s commercial.
Exactly.
Right? Just trying to say what it is, right? So, but then the third time I asked him, I said, why the library? Why now? And he says, as I was growing up, we had actually nothing. But there was always a library. Right? Now imagine if you lead with that versus reading is fundamental.
You're listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast with host May Harris.
Today, my guest is Dr. Lyn Corbett, who is the president and founder of the Pivotal Group. Thank you so much for joining me today, Lyn.
May, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, you were one of my first that when I was coming up with ideas on who to interview, I was like, I need to get Lyn on here. So, in your role, as with the Pivotal Group, you do a lot of everything, nonprofit consulting, but across the board. So, leadership development, governance, strategic planning, and program evaluation. Maybe tell me a little bit about the genesis of the Pivotal Group and what you're doing there.
Yeah, back in 2013, my wife and I were doing some consulting work, and what we enjoyed most about it in our regular jobs that we had at the time was as people were coming to us for information, we would give them the information, give them some of our insights, and then 3 months, 6 months later, they would come back and say, okay, we got that done, what's next? Right? And we found joy in just being able to, how can we multiply the work that we're doing in the community to increase our own impact. And we realized that it was going to be through others, right? And because some people speak in different languages, they live in different locations, it was like now we are imparting some of our work in different languages in different parts of the country. So we found tremendous joy from it. And so we started the Pivotal Group in 2013. And the reason we called it the Pivotal Group is because we believe that nonprofits and community-based organizations are pivotal to the success of communities. And in fact, in some European countries, they say you can judge the stability of a society by the way their nonprofit sector is.
Right. How robust it is. Uh-huh.
Yes. So very, very interesting approach to it. So we really enjoyed it. And as you mentioned, we do strategic planning, board governance, board development, and a number of other different services. We kind of call it a boutique firm because it's we're a small, mighty group of individuals that kind of like work together to address the most pressing needs. And many organizations come to us with a variety of different needs, and our goal is to get them to success.
Right. Well, you mentioned one thing that I think is it is critical to any nonprofit success, and that is how good and engaged their board is and the culture of their board. So do you think that there's a secret to having a good and engaged board? And if so, you want to share it?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think that could be extremely valuable for anyone who's listening. The first thing I think that I often at times do with a lot of my boards are work about like, what is their why, right? I ask them, why, what is their reason for being here? Why now, right? So why this organization? Why now? Similarly, based off of Simon Sinek's book, it starts with why, and his TED talk about how great leaders inspire action. So I'll give you an example. I was working with the Library Foundation, and I asked the gentleman, it's a Saturday morning, you can be anywhere, so why here? Why now? He says, well, reading is important. And I said, great, but why are you here? If you can ask somebody 5 whys, sometimes you get down to the bottom of it. I didn't have to ask him 5 whys, but I said, so why? He says, reading is fundamental. And I immediately responded, well, that's an 80s commercial.
Exactly.
Right? Just trying to say what it is, right? So, but then the third time I asked him, I said, why the library? Why now? And he says, as I was growing up, we had actually nothing. But there was always a library. Right? Now, imagine if you lead with that versus reading is fundamental. right? So it really helps them understand what is their personal why. But then I do an exercise where they try and say, okay, now if we were going to ask your organization what its why is, let's talk about why the organization comes to be. When Board Source, one of the well-known board governance-focused organizations in the country, did an assessment, and they asked 100 board presidents and 100 EDs, what's the number one thing that you want in a board member? And automatically everybody thinks it's money. And believe it or not, money is the last thing on the list. The first thing on the list is commitment to the mission and understanding why the organization exists. So the secret is helping people explore their why and explore the organization's why. And then at least you have a foundation. And it amazes me, people who have been friends for 10, 12 years, they're learning something new by just exploring that question.
That is a great way to kind of attract new board members, really good ones, if the organization really knows its why and every member of the current functioning board can explain their personal why. I don't think you'd have a problem getting new people, right? Which typically can be one of the hardest things for nonprofit organizations to do, is to keep an engaged, growing, you're going to have attrition. It just always happens, but to have, new people that are very engaged and wanting to help out. So great advice there, I think.
Well, good. Love this work. Love working in the community. Have been doing this work for, I guess, almost 30 years now. And I'm a born and raised New Yorker, started in New York doing this type of work, working at YMCAs and running summer camps and basketball camps, and just fell in love with the field. I remember two things that really locked me into this field. One of them was the fact that, there was some joy that I found that when I'm taking care of kids when I was working specifically with youth and kids, and I remember their parents coming to pick them up. And I remember the kids' face just lighting up, right? And the parents' face just lighting up. And for that moment there was like, hey, we're reunited. I went to work and did my thing. You were here and did your thing. We're both safe. Now we can kind of go home, right? And as a part of me is like, I'm glad this kid's leaving, right? But it didn't mean, it was really more about how do we bring true joy and safety to environments and communities and give children what they need to be successful. And I think there's a movement across the country that is vesting in our youth at a very young age who really need some key skills they need to be successful. And starting off early on is important. And that was one thing. And then running myself, even though I was born in New York, we never really, as a family, never really had the opportunity to travel to see a lot of the New York sites. Well, when I started running summer day camps, I was scheduling trips to the Statue of Liberty, all of these different things. So I had a chance to explore all of these unique the places across New York City that really made me solidify my career as an nonprofit and employee, nonprofit ED, and now a consultant. One last thing I would just share is that this came up a couple of weeks ago. I was working with an organization in Northern California, and we were talking about how their leadership team makes decisions. They were a social service organization, government entity. And when I asked, well, how do you all make decisions? It was kind of like they were all quiet, right? Like they knew that we talked about it, but they didn't have a decision-making approach that they could kind of point to. So what I said was, and this made me think about my upbringing, and I hadn't thought about it for so long. When I was growing up, my biological parents became foster parents. So as I was growing up, we had different foster children coming in and out of our house. And my two younger brothers were adopted ultimately when they stopped being foster parents. So I ultimately ended up running a foster care agency for a number of years also. So I didn't realize how much that influenced my life. But to get back to the story here, I asked the group, Lyn, who is 10 years old at the time, and has different children coming into his home that he values as friends and really, really loves them. He's not sitting around saying, I hope they're making good decisions. I hope they have a decision-making model in store, right? It's really about doing things that are supposed to be done in a certain way with a certain level of quality. And there is an expectation that people know what's going on so that they don't have to worry about it. And I think that as in this field of serving and social services, we really need to understand the responsibility that comes with the work that we're doing.
Thank you for sharing your why. You shared several different whys in there, and they were all legitimate. They were fantastic. So, when you do that work and you have determined the organization's why, and hopefully everyone else is also rowing in the same direction on the board. Part of that, how do you bake that in? Is it culture? Is it strategic planning? How do you bake that into how an organization operates?
Just to, as far as the governance perspective, or would you like it more broadly?
Let's do both.
Okay, good. Well, from a governance perspective, I think that there's a couple of things that, and I'm giving away all my secrets here, by the way. So from a governance perspective, I think that there's something to be said that the way that a board member comes on to the way that they depart. And often at times, there's not enough information put in there for it. Often at times when you need somebody, they'll say, we need another board member. And somebody says, hey, my cousin John likes kids. And they want to get John on the board, but we don't even know if John likes kids the way we want John to like kids. All right. It's really just finding somebody who can join the board. And that's really not what it's about. Now, I that's a little bit being a little facetious there, but the point is that it's that serious. Anybody who comes into our environment has to be somebody who's well vetted, and we understand what they're bringing to the table and they understand their expectations. So I often at times talk to people about this leadership development packet, board recruitment packet that I refer to it as, is that people get in advance. They get in advance. It's like a very good depiction of what the responsibilities are, what the expectations are. And I find that if they have this in advance before they even meet with you, about what the potential is for board engagement or working with the board, they already know what the expectations are. And the fact that you're so thorough with that information, they should say, okay, I got to bring my A game here. Right. And I believe what they do next is that their goal is to, one, meet with the ED and potentially the board chair. And then secondly, to follow up, and I always say match them up with a board buddy, somebody who can really help them understand and answer any questions for them. But my part is a little bit different here. So the board buddy's responsibility is to, one, connect with them. But the second one I think is more important, and that is they're supposed to be standing on the curb waiting for the first day they arrive, so that they're welcoming them into the family essentially and saying, hey, rather than them sitting on the side by themselves on their phone, they're actually making connections with them and saying, hey, don't you have an 8-year-old? Oh, they have an 8-year-old. And you're bringing them in so they feel really connected. And then the thing about that also is I think that we as leaders within organizations really don't ask ourselves a question about board members that we should be asking. And that is, this person is joining our board. They will be with our board for the next 2 years. What is it that, or 2 or 3 years, what is it that we want them to experience with their time with us? Mm-hmm. Is it that we want them to understand what it means about giving and where their money goes? Is it that we really want them to understand and learn some leadership development skills, understand finances? But whatever it is, everybody comes in with unique needs, right? Great. The other thing is, by having this dialogue pretty early on, you start identifying who has strengths that could really benefit the organization.
Right.
Right. And again, board chairs and EDs want somebody who is truly passionate about the organization. However, we still talk about who are their friends that can bring money to us. Right. So it's just this paradox.
Well, it's a very one directional kind of perspective, right? Who can bring us the most money? When that's not really, I couldn't agree with you more that that's not the most important thing about this board director who is taking up one of your coveted board seats. It's how engaged, how involved this individual will or can be, right? I've spoken with organizations that are like, oh, if we do all this at the front end, they will go away. They wouldn't be interested in joining us. And my response is, if that's actually the case, first of all, I don't think that's the case. But if it actually is, that's not the type of person you want on the board either. You want someone who's engaged, who understands the organization, is a strategic thought leader, if at all possible, not just someone who's just going to be there to make a vote here and there and bring in some money.
Yeah, it's, you say you hit it right on the head. It's just more important than we believe. And I like what you said is that if this is too much for them, then it's going to be too much for them later on. But if they're willing to come in and understand that they're not doing us a favor, but there's a responsibility that we have to, one, to protect an organization, and two, to move it forward. And if we're all on the same page and we all understand that, you'll start seeing some of the results that you want. I will tell you this, I've been doing this for 25 years. And when I wanted to join a board in San Diego, as I traveled the country, I would always do a couple of things as I came into the new environment. So I worked in New York, New Jersey, Washington, D.C. for a number of years, Philadelphia, mostly on the East Coast, and of course, traveling the country doing different types of work. But I would always join a church, join a gym, and mentor youth. That was what I would do at each of my areas, and I would always feel like I could be really, really close to what's going on. When I ended up having my own son, I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to join a church, join a gym, and join a board. Right. So I found a board out in San Diego that I wanted to join. And I went to the woman and I said, I love the way you all have been talking about your mission, passionately about it. I'd love to see if there's something that I can do to be part of your board. So she says, well, this is great. They toured me around. They said, like, Lyn is great. But they said, you can't join our board right away. You have to join a committee. Right. And I said, for me, 25 years of experience, but I said, okay, great. So I joined the committee and of course did bylaws, which of course are the most exciting thing in the world. Right. We did their bylaws. And then after 6 months, I joined the board. But interestingly enough, in that 6-month period, I got to know them. They got to know me. Right. I got the commitment there that I'm part of this organization. So then it was almost like they hooked me enough that I wouldn't just walk away. Whereas if I was on the board or some people on the board and then they leave, people are like, why did they leave? We thought they were like us. What's going on? So it's this process of putting board members on committees prior to making them part of the board chair. Part of the full board. I will tell you this, though. In my time with that board, the only one person that blew off of the board, meaning one person who did not stay on the board for more than a year, was the person who did not join the committee first. And the reason that they did not join the committee was they ended up giving like $5 million to the organization. And somebody was like, they gave $5 million. Why should we put them on the committee? But they blew off because we did not have that opportunity to bond together. And in the long run, they're not part of the organization anymore. It's great to have a $5 million donation, but they're not part of the organization that it could be.
Well, and that might have been the only intent of that individual, was to be a contributor, to be a donor. Just because you want to financially support an organization doesn't mean that you want to be fiduciarily responsible for that organization.
Correct.
So there was just a little bit of a disconnect there. Okay. So you've been doing this for 25 years. You've seen all sorts of organizations. So let's talk a little bit about that. Is there a favorite organization? You don't have to name names, but just like use it as a little case study for like the best practice of an organization, in your opinion, after your 25 years?
That's a very interesting question. So there's two parts to it. One, you are familiar with the Nonprofit Institute, and I happen to like any organization similar to that who actually help other organizations, right? So I have something strong on me because it is consulting to a certain extent. They're tied to a learning institution. I'm a lifelong learner. I didn't get my PhD until I was 50, right? So that allowed me the opportunity to continue to learn. So organizations that work with universities and continue to instill some of this education and strategy and all different types of work in the community, I love tremendously. And there's many universities that do it across the country. The Nonprofit Institute does it at the University of San Diego, and I think it's incredible. When I was working with the Nonprofit Institute, we created a program called the Nonprofit Academy, where we served over 500 organizations for free, giving them the skills and the stuff that they need. In fact, I believe you helped us teach some sessions in there when we launched the program.
That was a great program.
We actually found that the people who participated in the program, we did an analysis and an evaluation, and we found that they ended up making more money, having more different types of diversify their funding, and they increased their partnerships, right? Just by doing a couple of things, being around each other, getting some of this basic training that they may not have received. We had comments of people mentioning that they did not, they've been paid for going to conferences other places, and now they have one in their community that they can do for free, and it was better. Right. And we won a local award for this work, and we won an international award for that work. So it was a really, really nice model that we were able to put together. So that's one aspect of an organization that, that I hold to be true. One other organization that I liked, and, I grew up doing this work, which is the YMCA and Father Fun Against Boys Town, which had that worked with what they refer to as wayward youth back in the day, boys and young ladies who they put them in homes with married couples that are teaching them some of the basic skills that they need to be successful. But the YMCA, which most of us are familiar with. But what I liked about both of them, that the investment that they put in to their children at a very, very young age. And it was really more about skills. Like, how do we give them the skills that they need to be successful? It's funny, as I made my way up into the ranks, people would say, Lyn, you worked with kids a lot of your career. How do you like working with kids? And I said, well, honestly, I don't really work with kids anymore. I work with people who work with kids, right? So the higher up you get, the less connected to the children and youth that you are. And in fact, you're more involved in the leadership development and skill development of those that are serving our kids, and teachers that are volunteering their time and energy to see the success of kids. And you'll see that across the country, a lot of jurisdictions now are investing in 3 and 4 year olds, providing them pre-K education for free to different communities, because we recognize that early investment could really transform communities.
Right. But at this stage in your career, you can have more impact mentoring the mentors and showing that kind of leadership to, the next generation of boots on the ground, which is pretty fantastic, really. Now, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting when we were talking about the Institute, because it's kind of a recurring theme, I think, that I've heard time and time again, which is the organizations that succeed are the ones who are collaborative and cooperative, not the ones who are competitive necessarily. Like, no, we don't want to work with that nonprofit. They do the exact same thing we do, so we're in competition with them. When really, if you collaborate and you share resources and you share best practices and knowledge, you end up actually succeeding more than if you were competitive. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I teach strategic planning at a couple of universities, and you're up my alley now that we're transitioning to strategic planning, right? So I do strategic planning, of course, with our firm. We did some large strategic plans with San Diego County EMS. Working now with Berkeley Public Library System doing their strategic plan, and then we'll be starting the City of Richmond strategic plan. So we've done a lot of small nonprofits all the way up to a lot of large municipalities. So understanding and embracing strategy is extremely important. I have a book that should be published very soon, and it's called Hope is Not a Strategy, right? Like, you can't just hope things happen, all right? You'll have to really have this sense of intentionality and understanding what it's about. Now, to get to the question of collaboration and competitive advantage. So, a lot of nonprofits think we can't talk about competitive advantage because, we technically shouldn't be competing. Well, the reality is, as you mentioned, many people feel that they do compete, but technically you compete for dollars. Sometimes you compete for staff. Sometimes you compete for funding, right? So there's board members, right? So there's a number of things that you do compete for. So if I tell nonprofits often at times, if you feel that somebody else is doing the exact same thing as you are, then maybe you should close up a shop, or maybe you should merge. But it's not about, first of all, let's get the competitive advantage. Let's get the competition out of the way. First of all, there's more than enough kids to come around. There's more than enough work for everybody to be full of it. So it's really not about competition, first of all. But you should know, meaning competitive advantage, what makes you so unique that people would like to go to you over others.
Yes.
And you should know that, because once you identify what your strength is, and then you can leverage it even more. So if you provide safety better than anybody else, right, you can leverage that and highlight that. If you can provide education or leadership or whatever it is better than anybody else, then you can do that. But you must know, and the way you can do that is through evaluation, etc. So I would say that from a collaboration perspective, if you can work with another organization and there's a clear alignment and you understand what the expectations are on both halves, collaboration is going to be one of the biggest parts of this type of work that we're doing. It can be similar work. It can be work that continues, right? One person starts at this working and then another person takes part two. So there's a number of different ways that we want, but we do know that often at times nonprofits are stronger and better when they're together. Right. But it's the working together, understanding the expectations, treating it almost as a legal agreement so that there's no gray area. There's transparency among the funding and the contract, so people understand what all is expected. But I do think there's something to be said for nonprofit organizations that can collaborate within the sector and without the sector for the greater good. And this work is extremely hard to do by yourself and your own little bubble. And often at times the work keeps us looking insular. And I think there's a part of leadership development that's really focused on the external as well.
Well said. Absolutely well said. Okay, final question for you. So you recently taught on the topic of how to be a nonprofit consultant. So you're even mentoring other nonprofit professionals and consultants. But when it comes to a nonprofit who, is mature enough that, they're starting to need a nonprofit consultant, whether that's finance or program or fundraising or whatever, what kind of things would you recommend that nonprofit organization does when they're looking for a nonprofit consultant, looking to hire?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, we've started looking at training nonprofit people who would like to be nonprofit consultants. We believe that board assistance and helping through a board is one way, but there's also another way where people have some specialties that nonprofits may need that they can, rather than say, can you volunteer and do this, but it becomes a little bit more of a formalized relationship. Consultants can charge $0, but it's more about that consultant relationship and what both people can learn from it, but it's also clarifying what the expectations are. So if a nonprofit is seeking a consultant, the thing that I would say is the most important for them is understanding specifically what they would like a nonprofit consultant to do, and also what problem they're trying to solve. I do want to say often at times people call me and that's one of the biggest challenges is starting with this funnel at top and then trying to figure out at the bottom, like, what exactly is it? And then we're able to work on that. But often at times they know there's a challenge. They just don't know what that is. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's where somebody else can come in and look at it objectively. And that's what a consultant can do, and sometimes board members. But I find that when we're doing the strategic plans, and sometimes you're right, it's when they reach a certain area where they can. Sometimes they're small organizations, sometimes there's larger, but it really depends on the skill set that's needed for them. But I would ask 3 or 4 questions. One is that there's nothing wrong with saying who have you worked with before on similar work, right? That's I would say one of the important things. The second important things that is worth considering is looking at, after you're able to identify what specific area that you're looking towards, what is the responsibility of the consultant and what is the responsibility of the nonprofit? So clarity around understanding the expectations of both parties. Often at times, sometimes consultants can come in, but it adds an extra 20 hours a week of work onto the ED. Right. So that's not what they anticipated. That's what no one anticipated. And the organization could hurt as a result. The other thing is that I think that there's a true high level of importance when it comes to what will it look like when this engagement has concluded.
Mhm.
Right. So I often at times ask because I want to know what your expectations are, the way that you see it, what is going to make things easier. So if I'm able to tell a consultant, afterwards, this is what I would like it to see like, then the consultant knows what the expectation is and they'll know if they can get you there or not. Right. And then again, just transparency all along the way. And transparency around expenses as well.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
often at times it's not tremendous expense. It's not a tremendous expense, but it is an expense, and just being clear about that. So those are just some of the things that I can think of that would be important. But I think there's a role for nonprofit consultants. I think that there's a space there where people do need help, and they're looking for a certain level of expertise, and nonprofit consultants sometimes fulfill that need.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Lyn. It's been such a pleasure having you on the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast, and thanks again.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Good.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. Are you ready to lead with clarity and confidence? Head to nonprofitcounsel.com to find the tools you need to start smart, lead strong, and create lasting impact.